What scares a person is genuinely subjective. For some, it's monsters, the supernatural or paranormal happenings we often can't see or explain that gets us. While for others, we may struggle to get through movies based on real events and the real evil things or people we actually can see. Regardless what scares you, this list is guaranteed to offer plenty of options that will strike some level of fear in you just in time for Halloween. So let's take a look at 7 movies that will actually scare you. So coming in at number 7, I've decided to start my list off with probably one of the more unsettling films I've ever seen. It's also probably the most graphic on this list as well, so I would only recommend watching this if you can stomach extreme violence. With that out of the way, High Tension is a movie that definitely left an impression on me the first time I saw it. Home invasions are scary on their own, but when a killer like this one is on the loose, it really makes you second guess how safe you actually are. Without spoiling too much, it's easy to write this off as a typical French extreme home invasion movie, but it actually has twists and turns in the film that end up making it more haunting than it is on the surface level. Now, the film does have some flaws in its plot, and the violence can be over the top at times, but I definitely think it's more effective than not. And while it does lean on its shock value a little bit, it's the psychological elements and twists that do most of the damage. Now for my next film, more so than any other movies on this list, is where subjectivity comes into play. Zombies are hardly seen as real, but if they were, and this is how they attacked us, our future time on this planet looks very grim. 28 Days Later is possibly my favorite zombie film of all time, simply due to its unique spin on the genre. And if you can put yourself into the position of the characters, it's one of the more suspenseful and thrilling horror films out there. The movie's bleak tone leaves a sense of dread throughout the entire runtime, and there are some scenes that will definitely make you jump. Besides the zombies being terrifying, another thing 28 Days Later does well is make you realize the film is less about the affected and more about how us, the people, would react under a potentially catastrophic viral outbreak. And in my opinion, that's where this movie really becomes frightening. So at number 5, this may come as a surprise to many of you. And I know many of you also may not like the idea of watching subtitles, but the 2001 Japanese film Cairo, or Pulse in English, is one of the most unnerving films I've ever seen. A film like Paranormal Activity is so effective because it plays with our emotions by using silence against us, and a film like Hereditary gets under our skin because it uses disturbing and lingering images to penetrate our minds. Cairo does both of these things, and does them exceptionally well. Being almost 20 years old, its cinematography is still among the best I've seen in a horror film. Now, the film is a bit slow, and it doesn't really rely on traditional jump scares, but it does create a mood so eerie and tense that it doesn't really matter. Its scenes of horror rely on stillness and its creepy sound design, and trust me when I say that's enough to give you the chills in this one. Your brain simply won't be able to comprehend some of the horrific things you see, and instead of cutting away or bailing you out with a jump scare, the scenes simply linger, forcing you to bask in a feeling of unease, and that feeling of unease is one you'll have throughout the entire film. Coming in at number 4 is another home invasion classic, The Strangers. So if you can't already tell, I have a thing about people being in places they aren't supposed to be in, and I bet you do too. The 2010 film Strangers taps into this idea, and honestly, the concept alone is worth being on this list. Now, this isn't a perfect movie by any stretch, but it does a lot well. It utilizes silence and some really underrated cinematography to make you feel like you're the one simply being stalked by sadistic psychopaths who have one goal, and that's to get inside of your house. The film does claim to be based off of real events, and while no direct link to these specific events can be found, something like this could easily happen and has happened before in the real world. So we can't technically say their disclaimer is wrong here. Our homes are supposed to be the one place we feel safest, and once that's compromised, you genuinely feel violated, and The Strangers successfully makes you feel as much. If this were a list of just the best horror movies, my number 3 pick, 2018's Hereditary, may be closer to the top than it is here. It's acted and shot brilliantly, and it's just an incredible work of art. I understand that it may be divisive in terms of how scary it is, simply because there aren't a lot of traditional jump scares and loud noises. The movie is also a bit of a slow burn. It's this slowness, however, that sets up for this unforgettably bleak and eerie atmosphere. In a similar manner to Cairo, it's the stillness and images that linger that are going to haunt you. But the main goal of Hereditary is to break you, and because of its tone, it effectively does just that. And while on the slower side, there are still plenty of moments that will freak you out. But if those aren't enough for you, the last 20 minutes of this film is pure nightmare fuel. Now, I'm a hard scare, and not much really bothers me, but there are some scenes in this film toward the end that messed with me for days after watching it, and that fact alone is enough to make this list. The late 2000s and the early 2010s had a great surge in horror films. We saw films like Paranormal Activity and Insidious kind of revamp the horror genre. But if there is one film that genuinely revitalized horror, specifically the possession subgenre, it would have to be 2013's The Conjuring. In my opinion, it's one of the greatest horror movies of all time, completely blending mainstream horror ideas with an artistic and, dare I say, somewhat elevated approach. It took an age-old concept and managed to still be unique with it, but above all else, scary. I don't think The Conjuring is perfect, but it does craft horror sequences so well. You'll definitely feel tense the entire time. I was creeped out purely from the movie's trailer alone, and it manages to hold this eerie atmosphere throughout its entire runtime. The jump scares are effective, and there are images and moments that will stick with you long after the credits roll. And short story, I worked at a theater in my earlier days, and specifically around the time this movie came out, and all I can say is try cleaning an empty theater or doing anything in the dark alone with this film's end credits music playing. I guarantee you that alone will have you feeling some type of way. Finally, coming in at number 1, we have Sinister. Sinister, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated horror movies of all time, as I think it's one of the best horror movies out there, period. It has something for everyone. Supernatural elements, one of the creepiest designed monsters or entities, and evil people carrying out some truly vile acts. But where Sinister really earns its scare points is not just in that these terrifying acts are happening, but how the film chooses to show them. It leans on its eerie sound design, editing style, and unnerving music score, ultimately creating a mood that makes you feel tense the entire time you're watching it. Most of the grotesque scenes are shown via Super 8 found footage films, and for some reason, this makes it all the more frightening. Not to mention, the individuals carrying out these acts are children, possessed by a demonic entity, so it makes you think twice about the unassuming people, adults or children, that may be living in your home, who have access to you at almost any time. Now sure, the ending could be a miss for some, and the child acting could be a bit cringe, but these minor complaints don't detract from the point Sinister is arguably one of the most unsettling and tense horror movies there is. So there you are, you guys. This concludes my list of 7 horror movies I believe will actually scare you. As always, what keeps you up at night is subjective, and these are only a few of them that managed to get me. I'd love to hear your thoughts on the movies that freaked you out, though, however. What are some of the scariest movies you've ever seen? Let's talk about it in the comments below. Also, if you haven't already, take a moment to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Those really help these videos get recognized in YouTube's algorithm, allowing this channel to continue to grow. As always, I appreciate the support, and I'll see you guys soon.